Hey everybody, welcome back to Race of History. We're going to do something a little bit different to start off today. TIK released a video a handful of days ago called Why I Reject the Madman Hitler Myth, and it looked super interesting to me. I wanted to watch it as soon as I saw it, but I thought I would hold off and do it on the channel. I'm really interested to hear what he says about this, so let's go ahead and get into it.
Adolf Hitler was a very naughty boy and one of the worst individuals in history. He killed a lot of people and you know the drill, but many are of the opinion, including numerous historians, that we can't understand this guy at all. He's so evil and so monstrous that we aren't even on the same wavelength as him. He's not human, and since we are human, well, most of us are, how can we possibly understand Hitler's reasoning? Worse, there's this weirdo online who has a YouTube channel that's pushing the idea that Hitler wasn't actually completely insane. I mean, a lot of people are complaining about this, just listen to one of his commenters. Please quit constantly defending Madman Hitler. It is something you do in nearly every episode and it comes off as kinda sketchy after a while. I'm sure fanboys are going to have a lot to say about this opinion of mine. I really love the detailed assessment of very important campaigns of World War II, but the constant defense of Hitler's sanity worries me. That's right, this YouTuber must be a secret Nazi or closet fascist or something else I do not like but cannot define. I have no problem with him explaining in detail events of the Stalingrad campaign or any other campaign, but if you repeatedly make the point that Hitler was sane, you are playing to the freaks and weirdos that are out there on the fringes, the neo-Nazis and anti-Semites. That's why I'm a little put off by the narrator constantly promoting Hitler's sanity. If you believe he was sane in his war maneuvers, then you could also believe he was sane in his desire to wipe out races that he felt were inferior. I don't think that TIK feels that way, but people like that who are watching these episodes may get the idea that he's in line with them. So, by rejecting the Madman Hitler idea, this YouTuber is defending Hitler and is pandering to the neo-Nazis and anti-Semites, and might even be a closet Nazi himself, and might be saying that Hitler's desire to wipe out groups of people was sane. I mean, this is pretty damning stuff, so I wonder what the YouTuber's response would be to this. Oh, nuts, it's me, isn't it? Okay, let me get my to-do list out. Let's see. Get a swastika tattooed on my forehead, go to my secret Nazi occult meeting on the moon, teach my dog to do the Hitler salute, spell out to the YouTube censors that this list is satirical. Oh, here it is! Point out that calling Hitler a madman spares him of responsibility for what happened and lets him off the hook for the crimes he committed.
And not only that, that's part of my issue with the madman theory in general. But the bigger thing that bothers me is that it doesn't absolve him. I mean, it sort of does, but it's not that it absolves him. It's that it absolves us. If we can put him out there as something different, something uniquely terrible, like Tick said, non-human, then it absolves us of ever having to deal with the reality that humans are extremely messy. And I mean, we study a lot of different wars on this channel. It's I've said this a million times. There is no. You could make the argument that human evolution, as far as like in regards to what people would consider our humanity, is a total myth. You could make that argument. Now, there's an argument for the other side also, but history has shown us, if nothing else, that given the right circumstances, humans can be the worst, right? And so, if we put not just Hitler, but everybody, every bad, historical character if we separate them from the group and say they are something unique, that disregards the reality that humans in general have this capability, can go down this road rather quickly. And so I feel like it's not just that you're not really looking at the reality of the situation, and because of that it kind of takes the heat off of Hitler. It's that it also kind of takes the heat off of the rest of humanity.
Huh. I guess I'm not a secret Nazi then. Well, in that case, I'll scrap my plans to be the next head of the World Economic Forum. Okay, let me explain. If Hitler is insane, then that means that he's got a mental disability. And since we don't chastise disabled people for being disabled, we actually feel sorry for them because it's not their fault that they're disabled, then we must therefore feel sorry for Hitler for being disabled, since it's not his fault. And everything he did can be dismissed as an accident, since his disability was what drove him to do what he did. And he can't take responsibility for his actions, since he couldn't control his disability. Therefore, if he was a madman, what happened wasn't his fault. So, the irony of all of this is that those of you who are saying that I'm defending Hitler are themselves defending Hitler. You are excusing him of his crimes, and it's actually me who is damning him. Rather than saying that Hitler was a madman and that he should have been in a mental hospital, I'm saying that he was sane and that he was responsible for his actions, and that this makes what he did that much worse. He did what he did based on his core beliefs, not by accident or by some disability. So I think instead of being put in a mental hospital, Hitler should be put in jail or sent to the gallows. I think he's a criminal and is responsible for what happened, not someone we should feel sympathy for. The same applies to the neo-Nazis of today. People are quick to call them insane or whatever, but I don't think that's necessarily true or the right strategy. I think the ideology of National Socialism is bad and has corrupted these people. They are misguided. They have fallen for the ideology for various reasons, but by explaining why their core beliefs are incorrect, we can convert them away from National Socialism so that they can be normal people again.
Yeah, and I feel like people in general sometimes have a hard time reckoning with some of these things, but in the modern world where everybody latches onto a group identity, I mean, it is everywhere. You see Dogma pop up, even, I mean, it very closely mirrors religion, in my opinion, in these very non religious ideologies, right? Um, and I mean, it's not one side of the political spectrum or another. It's not even specifically in politics necessarily. It kind of warps itself into other things. But that, I just think that that in and of itself is not, well, I feel like it's people more or less like being duped, right? The idea that you have these, I mean, it's a okay thing to have core beliefs, right? But when you so latch yourself to core beliefs that nothing else, like there is no other evidence or ideas or theories or anything at all that could make you change your mind, then that's that's dogma, right? Like that's, you don't need to think to attach yourselves to things like that, which I mean, I guess makes it easy or easier to latch yourself onto things like that, but you're not being you're not being led in a correct direction, even if you think that it's you yourself that's being led there. I just think that when we attach ourselves to ideas and we feel like those ideas make up who we are as a person, then we can get into a place very easily, and I'm guilty of this too, of defending those things as if you were defending yourself, right? Defending those ideas, those ideologies, those beliefs as if somebody was attacking you personally when talking about the ideas. We have to be more intellectually, you know, savvy than that. I feel like um, I don't know. It's something that I don't think is conducive to human growth overall. And I think the ability for us to talk and debate and, throw different ideas back and forth is how we kind of continue as a society, right? And if everybody is in their dogmatic corners defending to the death their ideas, it's not, in my opinion, it's not a safe place to be for a society, a country, a region, or the world. And I think history shows this over and over and over again.
And some have actually done that. They've watched my videos on National Socialism and realised that I actually had a point and that they then stopped being Nazi or fascist. And yes, that has actually happened. I don't want to name any names, but if they're willing to say it, there might be a couple of them in the comments below. Whereas I think by dismissing them as insane or pushing them away or just punching a Nazi, you're just going to radicalise them and make the problem worse. I don't really agree with your central point, but I certainly enjoy being challenged. Having said that, your most central point of all, that the Madman Hitler routine is at best lazy, is spot on. The logic of Nazism is compelling to people to this day and needs to be understood. Dismissing it makes it considerably more powerful in the underground, and that has consequences aside from simply being wrong. I cannot thank you enough for your work on this point. And if Hitler was a madman, why did so many people support him? Although I totally despise Hitler and the Nazis, I've always believed it's a mistake to dismiss Hitler as insane or a madman. This is far too simplistic in understanding who this man was and how he was able to come to power in Germany and do all the things that he did. By dismissing Hitler and National Socialism as insane, what people are doing is opening the door to misinterpretations of history. Despite everyone calling each other fascist, nobody knows what the definition of fascism is. And the reason why is because they think if they read up about this ideology, they'll somehow get converted into being a fascist and then end up being Hitler. Well, no, that won't happen. Secondly, Hitler was a National Socialist, not a fascist. And yes, there is a difference between the two ideologies, even though Wikipedia and many historians can't distinguish the two or even clearly define either of them. They can't.
Yeah, there are a bunch of historians that argue about the true nature or whatever of fascism specifically, about what it really is. So that's interesting. He's made a video on that. I might check that out. um, yeah, they're just history is there for us to learn from, right? It's the whole reason why people are interested in history. It's the whole reason why it's studied. It's there to be learned from. And outright dismissing or twisting anything historically is going to have consequences, right? Because if history is there to learn from and you are learning the wrong thing or not learning about it at all, history rhymes. And if nobody knows what that history is, it's almost doomed to repeat itself.
Can't define them because they've dismissed them as insane ideologies that are unfathomable to normal human beings. Only monsters can understand these ideologies, apparently, which is why anyone who does understand them, like me, is instantly dismissed as crazy or insane or a secret Nazi and a monster and blah blah blah. Right? Well, I think this is a lazy narrative at best and deceitful at worst. The reason why they're willing to do this is because they're pushing their own ideological agenda. Also, by dismissing Hitler as a monster-raving loony bourgeoisie, what you're doing is saying, he's not human, he's a monster, and since none of us are monsters, Hitler was a one-off and such things will never happen again.
Yep.
Well, I've got news for you. Hitler was a human being. What he did can happen again, and has happened multiple times in history.
Yep.
From Lenin to Stalin to Mao to Pol Pot, as well as North Korea and modern-day China, we see the exact same things playing out again and again. Persecution of the Judeo-bourgeoisie, concentration camps, kidney farming, and mass starvation. History repeats, and the reason it does is because we've dismissed Hitler and others as some mythical monsters who we just can't possibly understand. No, they are human, and we can understand them, and it means that any human being can become the next Hitler. And
Yeah, that's literally spot on to what I was trying to get at. And we don't just do it with the bad side, to be fair. We tend to build up and mythologize and totally break from reality with historical characters we like too. But the difference with characters like a Stalin, Lenin, Hitler, uh, somebody like that is it's just extremely dangerous, right? It's extremely dangerous to assume that it takes something uniquely different to reach that point. It doesn't. They're just people, right? People under, you know, the, I don't want to say right circumstances, but, you know, under specific circumstances at a specific time, and you get one of these characters. And so yeah, it could absolutely happen today, and to be completely honest, is kind of happening today.
that we're all just as capable of committing the crimes that were committed before, because they were committed by human beings. I don't think people brand Hitler as a madman because they are lazy or that they are trying to hide something. My suspicion is that they simply cannot accept that he was a rational man, but that his rationality led him down some evil pathways that resulted in horrific outcomes. They cannot accept that any reasonably intelligent person can maneuver their thinking into what became the Third Reich, because to believe that is to believe any of us could become Hitler. That sort of thinking is just too much for a lot of people, and thus it is better to simply assume he was a loon.
Yeah, not only could any of us be Hitler, any of us could be anybody in the SS or anybody, you know, like it wasn't just one person that was doing all of this stuff. It was carried out by a lot of different people. And so to give, you know, intellectual credence to the idea that this was a rational thought process is kind of scary, right? Because yeah, it opens the door to many terrible similar things being able to be done by, you know, anybody.
But while Hitler wasn't a madman and therefore was responsible for his crimes, that doesn't necessarily mean that he didn't make a bunch of stupid decisions throughout the war. And since I'm
Yeah.
saying he didn't make all the stupid decisions that the German generals said that he did, I must therefore be defending Hitler. Right? Hi, TIK, long-time subscriber here. I just wanted to tell you that it's a pity you spend so much energy to convince also yourself, the audience, that the revisionist view that Hitler was right and the General Staff wrong is the correct one. It takes away from the good work you do providing historical content at an unprecedented high level, never seen before in such visual documentary format. When it comes to Hitler, as much as it may look difficult for you to believe, he had no grand strategy objectives nor good grasp of tactical flexibilities to achieve them. No, he did have grand strategic objectives. He wanted to take the land and resources of the East, Lebensraum, for reasons I've explained in detail in several videos, including this one, backed by sources at the bottom of the screen, link in the description.
Yeah, and the idea, first of all, I've made this completely clear. Halder drives me nuts. And that's where a lot of the post-war stuff comes from, is from Halder, right? Um, but also, the strategic objectives, Germany just wasn't in a great spot when they started Barbarossa, right? I mean, the second before they started Barbarossa, they were in an okay spot. But once they actually started it, they just weren't in a good spot. And so any strategic objectives are going to look pretty rough considering the state that Germany is in the second they step foot on Soviet territory.
Now, you may not have watched these videos because you are under the false impression that TIK-Me doesn't understand politics or economics, a view promoted by blatant ideologues pushing their own biased agenda. But by saying that Hitler had no grand strategic objectives and his ideology cannot be defined, you have confirmed that it is you who doesn't understand politics or economics or history. Don't stick to tanks, educate yourself. The simple proof is that if Germany had no oil and Hitler was right to go to the Caucasus to get it, why didn't he just provide another Panzer Corps to Rommel in 1942 to get the Egyptian and Middle Eastern oil while also capturing Malta, blah blah blah? Well, if you hadn't dismissed the economics and politics, you would understand. Literally watch any of the previous videos on oil, logistics and anything else. The Africa Corps could barely be supplied as is, and more forces would just make the overall situation even worse. Besides, the Middle East didn't have much oil at the time unless you drive all the way to South Iraq and Iran, then somehow transport it back across the Mediterranean when the Axis didn't have much shipping capacity and infrastructure for that anyway.
Okay, so this is actually where I totally disagree with Tick on this. The Africa Corps did have a hard time being supplied, and by 1942, once the push to the Soviet Union starts, that's it. That's it. There is no other direction you can pivot as Germany, right? It's just not possible. Here's the deal. The shipping capacity isn't there, particularly for something like the Mediterranean, because you can't go anywhere. The Germans can't go anywhere by sea. The Germans and Italians have shipping capacity, they just have no real way to use it, right? And so that's really not there. And Tick drastically downplays the amount of oil that is in the Middle East during World War II. Some of the charts that he uses gives overall amount of oil production for all of these different places, right? But doesn't give what each military uses and needs, okay? So for instance, it looks like the Soviet Union is producing, uh, you know, 8 billion metric tons of oil. They are not. They are getting oil subsidies from the US, who feel it is easier to pump oil, put it on a ship, send the ship all the way across the world, being guarded and being at threat of attack by U-boats, send that oil guarded across the world, get it to Russia, and then actually transport it to wherever Russia needs it. The US felt that was easier than helping Russia pump their own oil and update their oil infrastructure, right? So when you learn or know something like that, then when you start looking and diving into these totals for oil, it looks a little bit different, right? The Middle East has enough oil for the German military to do really anything it needs to do besides Operation Barbarossa. There isn't He's right that there isn't a way to get enough oil for Barbarossa because that's just not there isn't anybody besides maybe the US that has that type of capacity right off the bat, right? And so there isn't a way to there isn't a way to do that, okay? But here's the deal. If you pivot south the second that France falls, there is no British in the Mediterranean. It doesn't exist. The British have to leave the Mediterranean the second that North Africa is taken. The British are so ridiculously outnumbered in North Africa. It's stupid, and the British High Command is scared to death that North Africa is going to be taken because they just can't defend it right when France falls. Right when France falls, there's nothing the British can do to protect North Africa. And so you can read it from historians, you can read it from contemporary British sources at the time, you can read it from British military and political high command during the actual moments this is happening. They cannot protect North Africa, and they know it, and they know they lose the Mediterranean if North Africa is taken. So, this idea that you have to overload North Africa with all of these metamaterials is just not the case. It's just not the case. The British don't have the capacity to defend it in any real way right after the fall of France. And so this is something that I totally disagree with Tick on. And in fact, the more I look into it, the more I feel like he's he's more he's so dead set in this idea that he doesn't really even go into the details because like here's the deal. I've read historians who don't agree that pivoting south is the best move. That's I can sort of understand it, but if the options are pivot south or Operation Barbarossa, I wholly reject that Barbarossa is the better of those two decisions. Okay, um, but Tick doesn't really go into depth with the strategic situation on the ground in North Africa right after the fall of France. He basically just outright dismisses it and doesn't really get into it, at least in the videos that I've seen about this. And again, the one about oil is the more I dug into the oil situation for all of these countries, the more I realized that Germany actually could have done okay with Middle Eastern oil. They couldn't have if they were going to outright attack the Soviet Union right then. But if they were going to say just take the Middle East, go up to say the border of Turkey, you then have Greece and Yugoslavia that capitulate because they're trapped basically. You don't even have to invade. Um, they have enough oil to do that by taking the Middle East, by having their synthetic factories in Germany. Uh, they certainly have enough oil to hold the status quo there. And so the idea he that Germany couldn't piece together enough oil is, at least from the research I've done, is absolutely not true. It's absolutely not true. Um, they didn't have enough oil and couldn't have had enough oil for an operation the size of Barbarossa. But almost anything else that they wanted to do, they could have pieced the oil together had they been able to get the Middle East.
Not sure why you're against an objective view of what Hitler and his generals actually said and done.
Yeah, sorry, that was a little bit of a side thing from the actual video.
TIK is only presenting the history, and then it's up to you to make of it what you wish. And this is Geki's high IQ response. I think you are confused. Great response, bruh. In a nutshell, Hitler was the one who decided that autarky was the way to go, which meant he needed Lebensraum, living space in the east, which brought him into conflict with most of the world. Hitler was ultimately responsible for all of this, however, his generals helped him along. They then later claimed their innocence and blamed everything on Hitler. And since Hitler...
Which is stupid because after the fall of France, the generals really jumped on board, right? Like maybe some of them could have had an argument pre-France that they were like, we don't really know about all this, because there were some in the military chain of command that didn't think that Germany was ready for that type of, offensive warfare. But after the fall of France, basically everybody jumps on board and goes along with it. So then after the war, for the generals to basically claim innocence is wild. Especially because some of the generals, like freaking Halder, sucked.
was dead, he wasn't there to defend himself or explain why they were wrong. I've taken the view that while Hitler did make some bad military decisions, a lot of the bad decisions were actually made by his generals, who then blamed Madman Hitler instead of admitting their own mistakes. But, of course, this has led some to jump to false conclusions. I love your videos, I have been watching all of them. However, there is one issue that irks me and which you keep bringing up again and again and again. Madman Hitler. According to you, all the mistakes made by the Germans were made by his subordinates. I never said that. Yes, all of them. I never said that. Whether that be tactical or strategic, whether by Corps Commanders Heim Seidlitz, Army Commanders Paulus, Army Group Commanders von Weichs, or the Chief of Staff of the OKH Halder, I have yet to hear you blame Hitler for anything or even acknowledge that as Commander-in-Chief the ultimate responsibility lies with him. The ultimate responsibility lies with Hitler. He started the war and led the European Axis powers to a path of destruction. He also did make bad military decisions, however, his generals were not innocent, and a lot of myths have crept into the narrative. Let's take Barbarossa for example. I did a poll a couple of months back where I asked, how could Germany have beaten the Soviet Union in 1941? The first option was by going straight for Moscow, Halder's strategy. The second option was by going straight for the Caucasus, Hitler's strategy. And the third option was by retreating all the way to Berlin, Manstein's strategy.
Yeah, again, I don't think there's any way Germany could have beaten the Soviet Union. I think at best they could have fought them maybe to a stalemate, but a stalemate still is a long-term loss for Germany. And the stalemate only happens if Germany gets really lucky and none of the other Western powers are sending materials to the Soviet Union, which isn't what happened historically. So I just feel like invading the Soviet Union when they did was the death, the death knell for the quote unquote German Empire, the new German Empire. I don't think there was any way that was going to feasibly work out. They didn't have the oil at the time. Even if they took the Caucasus, they weren't going to be, like I said earlier, the U.S. felt like doing all that stuff to get oil to the Soviet Union was easier than helping the Soviets get their own oil and build up their own oil infrastructure. So I feel like even taking the Caucasus doesn't super help the Germans, but it does hurt the Soviets in a pretty substantial way. But I just don't think, realistically, I don't think there's any way to like finagle that through Barbarossa, right? I feel like the only way, the absolute only way that a true threat to the Soviet Union could have ever been made was if the Middle East was taken. Right? If the Middle East was taken, you can get close enough that you have aircraft that threaten the Caucasus from the south. And if that's the case, the Soviets are in a way worse position, and it changes the strategic balance of everything. But I just don't think an outright invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941 was a winnable situation or strategy for the Germans.
Now, many of you took this poll seriously and were confused by the Manstein plan. You know, how can retreating all the way to Berlin help you win the war? Exactly, that's why I put it in there. This poll was tongue-in-cheek. It's a reference to how Manstein always suggested giving ground to the Red Army before counterattacking. Hitler wanted to just keep the land captured because he considered it economically vital both to Germany and the Soviet Union. And as a lot of you pointed out, none of these options were really great, and many said that they couldn't have won now no matter what they did. Arguably, the Caucasus option was probably the best in theory, but it's logistically impossible. They struggled to supply their armies in the Caucasus in 1942, and that's after improving their logistics behind the lines over the previous year. So there's no chance of this strategy winning in 1941, unless the Soviet Union collapsed in the first few weeks, which was what Hitler hoped. As Alex said, Tick, a year ago I would have said A or B, but after your series, I don't know. Honestly, you opened my eyes to the whole logistics issues. Battles are won in the battlefield, wars with logistics. But if you listen to Halder, or the mainstream narrative up until a few years ago, they would have told you that going straight for Moscow was the best option and that they...
I still have people that argue this in the comments of my videos. I don't truly understand the reasoning for it, but I still get it.
would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for that meddling madman Hitler. No, it's too cartoonish. Hitler takes ultimate responsibility for having an autarkic economic policy that sent him to war with the Soviet Union, which he didn't have enough oil to win, which meant that they had to choose from a handful of bad strategies, which Halder then dabbled with and ultimately lost. So Halder is to blame for some of this, Hitler is to blame as well, and the same applies to other generals and for other campaigns. His generals weren't innocent is basically the point here, as Mango explains so eloquently. The Madman Hitler thing was from the generals to save their asses at the end of the war. And there's enough evidence to hang Hitler even if he didn't make any mistakes in the military campaigns, which he did. So let's just look at what actually happened and stop telling false narratives that make the generals or other ideologies appear innocent. And ultimately, that's what I'm trying to do here. Maybe I don't always get it right, but I'm challenging the old narratives for the right reasons. Also, here's a long but good quote from historian Ian Kershaw, who holds a similar view on the Madman Hitler idea. But although the strains of the last phase of the war took their toll on him, there is no convincing evidence that his mental capacity was impaired. Hitler's rages and violent mood swings were inbuilt features of his character. Their frequency in the final phase of the war was a reflection of the stress from the rapidly deteriorating military conditions and his own inability to change them, bringing, as usual, wild lashings at his generals, whom he could lay the blame that properly began at his own door. In looking for the loss of genius through pressures of overwork inappropriate to Hitler's alleged natural talent for improvisation, Speer was offering a naive and misleading explanation of Germany's fate, ultimately personalizing it in the demonic figure of Hitler. The adoption of such a harmfully overburdensome style of working was no chance development, it was the direct outcome of an extreme form of personalised rule, which had already by the time war began seriously eroded the more formal and regular structures of government and military command that are essential in modern states. No other war leader, not Churchill, Roosevelt or even Stalin, was so consumed by the task of running military affairs, so unable to delegate authority. The breakdown of governmental structures in Germany had gone yet further than their erosion in the Soviet state under Stalin's despotism. The reins of power were entirely held in Hitler's hands. None existed that could bypass the Führer.
Uh, what do you guys think about that? I This is probably going to be something I have to look at more, dig into more. But I mean, Stalin had the purge, or the purge is. Like, I don't know. I feel like he was pretty involved. I don't know. What do y'all think about that? The comparison specifically between Stalin and Hitler. There.
All vital measures, both in military and in domestic affairs, needed his authorization. There was no overriding coordinating bodies, no war cabinet, no Politburo. But Hitler, forced entirely onto the defensive in running the war, was now often almost paralysed in his thinking and often in his actions. Far more gifted individuals than Hitler would have been overstretched and incapable of coping with the scale and nature of the administrative problems involved in the conduct of a world war. Friends, Romanians, countrymen, I have come to bury Hitler, not to praise him. But I can't bury him in lies, so don't confuse my rejection of the Madman Hitler myth as a defence of Hitler. It may seem that way when you don't understand the reason why I'm doing it, but blaming Hitler for everything lets his generals off the hook and leads us to conclude that Hitler was a madman who was just misunderstood and should be forgiven because of his mental disability. No, not happening. And now I've got to go to my secret Nazi occult meeting on the moon, so I'm going to leave it there. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.
Okay, so that was TIK's Why I Reject the Madman Hitler Myth. Yeah, I agree with most of what TIK says in most of his videos. I feel like he slightly overlooks a handful of things. Here's the thing. It's impossible or almost impossible to not do this. When you're studying history and you drill in on one thing in particular, like you're deep diving something like World War II, and I mean like really deep diving it, it's really hard not to start pulling on the same threads of causation throughout the whole thing, right? And so what you'll see historians that look at World War II from the vantage point of like these one, two, three things that they feel like are ultimately important in the direction that it goes. Well, Tick's thing for that is logistics, right? I feel like he overlooks some other aspects, at least from what I've seen, of, well, say manufacturing, right? Or even like, I'm not going to go too far into it, but it's not specific to him, though. Like I said, it's hard not to, because you keep seeing the same problems and same things pop up. It's hard not to keep grabbing the things that you've seen going into it, right? Um, and so that's kind of just the reality of what it is when you study these things in depth. But I really like his videos, even when there's things I disagree with, which the Madman Hitler theory or myth or whatever is not something I disagree with him on. I totally agree with him on that. But even when I do disagree with him on stuff, I feel like he's giving an honest interpretation of the situation. And so, like, if he overlooks things, or I feel like he's overlooking things, I feel like he's not purposefully leaving things out to like strew the history in a direction. He's just trying to do kind of the best he can with the way he's viewing it. And so I really appreciate that, actually. But yeah, that was a good one. As always, like, comment, subscribe. Help me keep building the channel over here. I'll put the link to the Discord down below, and I'll see you all next time.